What if a handful of cryptic lines written thousands of years ago held the blueprint for how reality works, and no one can prove who wrote it? Picture this: 13 sentences. That's it. 13 sentences that have influenced kings, philosophers, scientists, and mystics for over a millennium. These words have been translated into dozens of languages, copied by hand through the Dark Ages, and studied by everyone from medieval alchemists to modern quantum physicists. They've inspired the pursuit of the philosopher's stone, shaped the foundations of Western esotericism, and continue to spark heated debates in academic circles today. The text I'm talking about is called the Emerald Tablet, and it begins with these enigmatic words: "That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing." If that sounds confusing, you're not alone. Scholars have been arguing about what these words actually mean for centuries, but here's what makes this text truly extraordinary. Despite its brevity and mystery, the Emerald Tablet has become one of the most influential documents in the history of Western thought. Today, we're going to dive deep into this ancient puzzle. We'll explore who might have written it, trace its mysterious appearance through history, decode its cryptic meanings, and discover why it continues to fascinate people from all walks of life. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why 13 simple sentences have captivated humanity for over 1,000 years, and why they might be more relevant today than ever before. Let's start with the supposed author of the Emerald Tablet, Hermes Trismegistus, whose name literally means Hermes the Thrice Great. But here's the first mystery we encounter. Could this mythical figure be a blend of gods, or was he someone real, whose name we simply forgot? The figure of Hermes Trismegistus emerges from a fascinating fusion of Greek and Egyptian religious traditions. In ancient Greece, Hermes was the messenger of the gods, the guide of souls to the underworld, and the patron of merchants, thieves, and scholars. He was associated with communication, wisdom, and the crossing of boundaries between worlds. Meanwhile, in ancient Egypt, Thoth was the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, and magic, the divine scribe who recorded the deeds of the dead and maintained the universe's equilibrium. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, these two cultures began to blend in ways that would reshape the ancient world. In Alexandria's intellectual melting pot, Greek philosophy met Egyptian mysticism, giving birth to entirely new ways of thinking about the universe and humanity's place within it. It was in this cultural fusion that Hermes Trismegistus was born, not as a flesh and blood person, but as a symbolic figure representing the marriage of Greek rational thought and Egyptian mystical wisdom. He embodied the perfect sage, someone who understood both the seen and unseen worlds, who could navigate the realm of the gods as easily as the realm of mortals. But here's where things get complicated. While most scholars today agree that Hermes Trismegistus was a mythical figure rather than a historical person, the ancient world took him very seriously indeed. For over 1,000 years, a vast collection of texts was attributed to him. Writings on philosophy, alchemy, astrology, magic, and theology that would collectively become known as the Hermetic corpus. How could such a short text have survived for centuries across cultures? This question becomes even more intriguing when we consider that the Emerald Tablet, supposedly the most important work attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, doesn't appear in any of the classical Hermetic texts that we know were circulating in the ancient world. The earliest Greek Hermetic texts, like the famous Corpus Hermeticum, date back to the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE. These philosophical dialogues explore themes of divine knowledge, the nature of reality, and the path to spiritual enlightenment. They're sophisticated works that show clear influences from Platonic philosophy, Egyptian religion, and early Christian thought. But nowhere in these early texts do we find the Emerald Tablet. This absence is puzzling, especially given the tablet's later reputation as the foundational text of Hermetic wisdom. If Hermes Trismegistus really wrote the Emerald Tablet, and if it really contained the essence of his teachings, why don't we see it quoted or referenced in the other works attributed to him? Some scholars suggest that the Emerald Tablet might represent a later development in Hermetic thought, perhaps a distillation of earlier, more complex teachings into a form that could be easily memorized and transmitted. Others wonder if it might have originated in a different cultural context entirely, only later being attributed to Hermes Trismegistus as a way of lending it authority and gravitas. The mystery deepens when we consider the various claims made about Hermes Trismegistus throughout history. Medieval and Renaissance thinkers believed he was a real person who had lived in ancient Egypt, possibly even before Moses. They saw him as one of the Prisci Theologi, the ancient theologians who had received divine revelation and passed it down through the ages. To them, the wisdom of Hermes Trismegistus was not just philosophy. It was divine truth revealed to humanity in its purest form. This belief in the antiquity and authority of Hermetic wisdom had profound implications for how the Emerald Tablet was received and interpreted. If Hermes Trismegistus was indeed an ancient Egyptian sage who had conversed with the gods, then his words carried weight far beyond that of ordinary human philosophy. They were seen as keys to understanding the fundamental principles that governed both the physical and spiritual worlds. But modern scholarship has largely debunked the idea of Hermes Trismegistus as a historical figure. The Renaissance belief in his great antiquity was based on faulty chronologies and wishful thinking rather than solid historical evidence. The Hermetic texts show clear signs of having been composed in the early centuries of the Common Era, drawing on Greek philosophy and absorbing influences from various religious traditions of the time. So if Hermes wasn't a real person, what does that mean for the Emerald Tablet? Does it make the text less valuable or less meaningful? Not necessarily. In many ways, the mythical nature of its supposed author makes the Emerald Tablet even more fascinating. It suggests that the text emerged not from the mind of a single individual, but from a broader cultural process, a distillation of wisdom traditions that transcended any single author or school of thought. The figure of Hermes Trismegistus, then, might be best understood as a symbol of humanity's eternal quest for wisdom and understanding. He represents the part of us that seeks to bridge the gap between the material and spiritual worlds, to find patterns and principles that can help us make sense of existence itself. In this light, the question of whether he really existed becomes less important than what he represents. the human aspiration to transcend ordinary consciousness and glimpse the deeper truths that govern reality. This brings us to another crucial question. Is there a missing part of the tablet that we've never found? The text as we know it today is remarkably brief. 13 sentences that manage to pack an enormous amount of meaning into very few words. But is this all there was? Or might there be more extensive teachings that have been lost to time? Some traditions suggest that the Emerald Tablet was originally part of a larger work, or that it was accompanied by commentaries and explanations that helped clarify its more obscure passages. Others propose that the tablet itself was meant to be a kind of mnemonic device, a way of encoding more extensive teachings in a form that could be easily memorized and passed down orally. The truth is, we may never know the full story of the Emerald Tablet's origins or its supposed author, but perhaps that's part of its enduring appeal. In a world where we often demand clear answers and definitive proof, the Emerald Tablet invites us to embrace mystery and ambiguity. It challenges us to find meaning and wisdom, not despite its obscurity, but because of it. As we move forward to examine its first documented appearance in the historical record, we'll see how the mysterious origins of the Emerald Tablet become even more puzzling when we trace its journey through different cultures and languages. Now we come to one of the most perplexing aspects of the Emerald Tablet's story: its sudden appearance in the historical record. Why does the Emerald Tablet suddenly appear in Arabic texts centuries after it was supposedly written? The earliest known version of the Emerald Tablet appears in an 8th century Arabic work called the Book of the Secret of Creation and the Art of Nature, attributed to a mysterious figure known as Belinus. This attribution is itself problematic, as Belinus appears to be an Arabized version of Apollonius of Tyana, a 1st century Greek philosopher and supposed miracle worker who lived centuries before the text's appearance. But here's what makes this appearance so puzzling. If the Emerald Tablet really was an ancient Egyptian text written by Hermes Trismegistus, as later European alchemists would claim, then why don't we find any trace of it in the extensive Greek Hermetic literature that was widely circulating in the ancient world? Why does it first appear in Arabic, in a culture that was supposedly far removed from its Egyptian origins? The 8th century Arabic text presents what would become the canonical version of the Emerald Tablet, though even this early version shows signs of having been translated or adapted from other sources. The language is dense and symbolic, packed with alchemical imagery and metaphysical concepts that would have been familiar to educated readers of the time. How could such a short text have survived for centuries across cultures? This question becomes even more intriguing when we consider the path the tablet took from its Arabic origins to its eventual fame in medieval and Renaissance Europe. After its initial appearance in Arabic, the Emerald Tablet began to spread throughout the Islamic world. Islamic scholars and alchemists, known as the Sons of Hermes, embraced the text as a foundational document of their art. They saw in its cryptic verses the essential principles of alchemical transformation, not just the transmutation of base metals into gold, but the transformation of the human soul from ignorance to enlightenment. The great Persian alchemist Jabir ibn Hayyan, known in the West as Geber, referenced the Emerald Tablet in his works, helping to establish its reputation as a crucial text for anyone seeking to understand the mysteries of nature and transformation. Other Islamic alchemists composed extensive commentaries on the tablet, attempting to decode its symbolic language and extract practical instructions for their work. But it was the translation of the tablet into Latin that would truly establish its place in Western intellectual history. The first Latin translation appeared in the 12th century, possibly created by scholars working in Spain during the period when Islamic, Jewish, and Christian cultures were engaged in intense intellectual exchange. This Latin version, which begins with the famous phrase, "Quod est inferius, est sicut, quod est superius," that which is below is like that which is above, would become the basis for virtually all subsequent European understanding of the text. But here's the crucial point. This translation was itself based on Arabic sources that were already several centuries removed from whatever original text might have existed. The process was like a game of telephone played across cultures and centuries. Each translation inevitably introduced new nuances, interpretations, and potential distortions. What we think of today as the authentic Emerald Tablet is actually the product of multiple layers of cultural transmission and linguistic transformation. Why do so many translations differ? And does that mean we've misunderstood it all along? This question haunts every serious study of the Emerald Tablet. When you compare different historical versions of the text, you find significant variations not just in wording, but in meaning. Some versions emphasize the alchemical aspects of the text, presenting it as instructions for laboratory work. Others focus on its cosmological implications, reading it as a description of how the universe operates. Still others interpret it primarily in psychological or spiritual terms, seeing it as a guide to inner transformation. These interpretive differences weren't just academic disputes. They had real-world consequences. Medieval alchemists spent lifetimes and fortunes trying to follow what they believed were the tablet's instructions for creating the philosopher's stone. Renaissance scholars built entire philosophical systems around their understanding of its principles. Modern esotericists continue to find new meanings in its ancient words. The 12th century Latin translation sparked an explosion of interest in Hermetic wisdom throughout medieval Europe. Scholars like Albertus Magnus and Roger Bacon studied the text intensively, seeing in it the key to understanding both natural philosophy and divine truth. They believed that the Emerald Tablet contained the fundamental principles that governed all of creation. Principles that, if properly understood, could unlock the secrets of alchemy, astrology, and magic. During the Renaissance, the Emerald Tablet's reputation reached new heights. Humanist scholars fascinated by the supposed wisdom of ancient Egypt treated the text as one of the most important philosophical documents ever written. Figures like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola saw in Hermetic wisdom an ancient theological tradition that predated and prefigured Christianity. The famous Renaissance magus Cornelius Agrippa included multiple versions of the Emerald Tablet in his influential work, 3 Books of Occult Philosophy, helping to establish its canonical status in Western esoteric tradition. By this time, the text had become so important that new translations and commentaries appeared regularly, each claiming to reveal its true meaning. But perhaps the most significant development in the tablet's historical journey came with the emergence of early modern science. Pioneers like Isaac Newton weren't content to simply read the Emerald Tablet. They saw it as a coded, scientific document that might contain genuine insights into the nature of physical reality. Newton himself made his own translation of the Emerald Tablet, trying to extract from its symbolic language principles that could be expressed in mathematical terms. He believed that the ancient wisdom encoded in Hermetic texts might complement and enhance the new experimental philosophy that was beginning to revolutionize human understanding of the natural world. This scientific interest in the Emerald Tablet raises fascinating questions about the relationship between ancient wisdom and modern knowledge. Were the early scientists right to see genuine insights in these cryptic verses? Or were they reading their own discoveries back into an ancient text that actually had little to do with empirical science? This scientific interest in the Emerald Tablet raises fascinating questions about the relationship between ancient wisdom and modern knowledge. Were the early scientists right to see genuine insights in these cryptic verses? Or were they reading their own discoveries back into an ancient text that actually had little to do with empirical science? The answer might depend on how we understand the nature of wisdom itself. The Emerald Tablet seems to operate on multiple levels simultaneously, as a practical guide, a philosophical statement, a spiritual teaching, and a poetic meditation on the nature of reality. Different readers in different eras have found different aspects of the text speaking to them most powerfully. This multidimensional quality might explain why the Emerald Tablet has proven so remarkably durable across cultures and centuries. Unlike more specific technical manuals or theological treatises, its symbolic language allows it to adapt to new contexts and interpretive frameworks while maintaining its essential mystery. As we move forward to examine the actual content of the Emerald Tablet, we'll see how this adaptability has allowed the same 13 sentences to inspire alchemists seeking physical transformation, philosophers exploring metaphysical questions, and modern readers looking for personal and psychological insights. The historical journey of the Emerald Tablet, from its mysterious appearance in 8th century Arabic to its central role in Renaissance thought to its continued influence today, is itself a testament to the power of symbolic language to transcend cultural and temporal boundaries. But to understand why this particular text has had such staying power, we need to look more closely at what it actually says. Now we arrive at the heart of our investigation, the text itself. Is this a recipe for turning lead into gold or mind into clarity? To understand why 13 sentences have captivated humanity for over a millennium, we need to examine what the Emerald Tablet actually says and the radically different ways it has been interpreted. Let's start with the text itself. Here's one of the most widely accepted English translations of the complete Emerald Tablet. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. And as all things have been and arose from one by the mediation of one, so all things have their birth from this one thing by adaptation. The sun is its father, the moon its mother, the wind hath carried it in its belly, the earth is its nurse. The father of all perfection in the whole world is here. Its force or power is entire if it be converted into earth. Separate thou the earth from the The subtle from the gross, sweetly with great industry. It ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again it descends to the earth, and receives the force of things superior and inferior. By this means you shall have the glory of the whole world, and thereby all obscurity shall fly from you. Its force is above all force, for it vanquishes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. So was the world created. Hence have there been wonderful adaptations, of which the means is here in this. Hence I am called Hermes Trismegistus, having the 3 parts of the wisdom of the whole world. That which I have said of the operation of the sun is accomplished and ended. At first glance, this might seem like gibberish, a collection of cryptic statements about sun and moon, earth and fire, ascending and descending. But beneath this symbolic surface lie layers of meaning that have inspired centuries of interpretation and debate. The opening line, "That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below," has become one of the most quoted phrases in all of esoteric literature. Known as the principle of correspondence, it suggests a fundamental unity underlying the apparent diversity of existence. But what does this actually mean? On the most literal level, medieval alchemists read this as instructions for their laboratory work. They believed that the same principles governing celestial bodies also operated in earthly materials. If you could understand the cosmic forces at work in the heavens, you could learn to manipulate similar forces in your chemical operations. The one thing mentioned in the text was often interpreted as the prima materia, the first matter from which all other substances were derived and to which they could potentially be returned. What do skeptics say? And are they missing the point? Modern critics often dismiss such interpretations as primitive thinking, the result of people who hadn't yet learned to distinguish between symbolic and literal truth. They argue that medieval alchemists wasted centuries chasing impossible dreams because they took metaphorical language at face value. But this criticism might itself miss the point. Even the medieval alchemists understood that their work operated on multiple levels simultaneously. Yes, they were trying to create gold in their laboratories, but they were also engaged in what they called the Great Work, a process of spiritual transformation that paralleled and informed their physical operations. The alchemical interpretation sees the Emerald Tablet as describing a process of purification and refinement that applies to both matter and consciousness. The separation of the subtle from the gross refers not just to chemical distillation, but to the gradual refinement of human awareness. The ascent from the earth to the heaven and subsequent descent represents the soul's journey toward enlightenment and its return with wisdom to transform earthly existence. This psychological reading of the Emerald Tablet has found new relevance in modern times. Carl Jung, the pioneering depth psychologist, saw alchemical symbolism as a projection of internal psychological processes. In his view, the alchemists were unconsciously working out the dynamics of individuation, the process by which the unconscious mind integrates with conscious awareness to create psychological wholeness. From this Jungian perspective, the one thing mentioned in the Emerald Tablet represents the self, the archetypal center of the psyche that transcends and unifies all partial aspects of personality. The various operations described in the text, separation, purification, conjunction, correspond to different phases of psychological development. But the Emerald Tablet's symbolic richness extends far beyond even these psychological interpretations. If you rewrote the tablet today, what truths would remain the same? This question invites us to consider what eternal principles might be encoded in its ancient language. One way to approach this is through the lens of systems thinking. The principle of correspondence, as above, so below, can be understood as describing the fractal nature of reality, where similar patterns repeat at different scales of existence. We see this principle confirmed in modern science through discoveries like the similarity between atomic structure and solar systems, or the way mathematical laws govern phenomena from quantum mechanics to cosmology. The tablet's emphasis on unity underlying diversity also resonates with contemporary insights from ecology, where we understand that apparently separate organisms are actually interconnected parts of larger systems. The one thing from which all things arise might be interpreted as the fundamental energy or information that manifests in countless different forms throughout the universe. The text's focus on cyclical processes, the movement between earth and heaven, the interplay of opposing forces, reflects patterns we now recognize as fundamental to both physical and biological systems. From the carbon cycle to the circulation of money and economies, to the feedback loops that maintain homeostasis in living organisms, the principle of circulation and return appears to be built into the fabric of existence. Why are quantum physicists, YouTubers, and psychologists still quoting the tablet today? Part of the answer lies in its remarkable ability to serve as a bridge between different ways of knowing. The text seems to anticipate insights that would later be formalized in fields as diverse as systems theory, depth psychology, and even quantum mechanics. Consider the tablet's statement that its force is above all force, for it vanquishes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. This could be read as describing the fundamental forces of physics, which operate at scales from the subatomic to the cosmic. Or it might refer to consciousness itself, which seems to transcend physical limitations while simultaneously being intimately connected to material processes. The ambiguity here isn't a bug, it's a feature. The Emerald Tablet's symbolic language allows it to function as what we might call a strange attractor for meaning, a pattern that draws diverse interpretations into relationship with each other without reducing them to a single, definitive reading. This multivalent quality becomes even more apparent when we examine how different translations of the text emphasize different aspects of its meaning. The Arabic versions tend to focus more heavily on cosmological themes, presenting the tablet as a description of how the universe came into being. The Latin translations often emphasize the practical, alchemical applications. Modern English versions frequently highlight the psychological and spiritual dimensions. Why do so many translations differ? And does that mean we've misunderstood it all along? Rather than seeing these differences as problems to be solved, we might view them as evidence of the text's remarkable depth and flexibility. Like a hologram, The Emerald Tablet seems to contain multiple dimensions of meaning that can be accessed from different angles. This interpretive richness has made the Emerald Tablet a kind of Rosetta Stone for Western esotericism. Across centuries and cultures, seekers have found in its brief verses the principles they needed to organize their understanding of reality. Alchemists found chemical processes, philosophers discovered metaphysical truths, psychologists uncovered mental dynamics, and mystics glimpsed spiritual realities. But perhaps the most profound aspect of the Emerald Tablet lies not in any specific interpretation, but in its invitation to perceive the interconnectedness of all existence. Whether read as science, psychology, spirituality, or philosophy, the text consistently points toward the unity that underlies apparent diversity. This theme of underlying unity becomes especially relevant in our contemporary world, where we're increasingly aware of the interconnectedness of global systems and the need for more holistic approaches to understanding complex problems. The ancient wisdom encoded in the Emerald Tablet may have more to offer our modern predicament than we might initially suppose. As we'll see in the next section, this timeless relevance helps explain why the Emerald Tablet became so central to the development of Western alchemical and esoteric traditions. Its influence extends far beyond its historical origins, shaping entire movements of thought and practice that continue to evolve today. The true measure of the Emerald Tablet's significance lies not just in its mysterious origins or cryptic content, but in its extraordinary influence on Western thought and culture. How did these short verses shape an entire era of magical science? To understand this impact, we need to step back and consider the intellectual landscape of medieval and Renaissance Europe. This was a world where the boundaries between science, philosophy, and spirituality were far more fluid than they are today. Natural philosophers sought to understand not just how things worked, but why they worked, and what their workings revealed about the divine plan underlying creation. Into this context came the Emerald Tablet, offering what appeared to be a concise statement of fundamental principles that could unite all knowledge under a single, coherent framework. For thinkers who believed that the universe was fundamentally rational and that human reason could penetrate its deepest mysteries, the tablet seemed to provide the key they had been seeking. The impact began with the early Latin translations in the 12th century. Scholars working in the newly established universities of medieval Europe encountered this text alongside other works attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, and they recognized immediately that they were dealing with something extraordinary. Here was a document that seemed to encode the essential principles of natural philosophy in a remarkably compressed form. But it was during the Renaissance that the Emerald Tablet's influence truly exploded. The humanist scholars of the 15th and 16th centuries were obsessed with recovering the wisdom of antiquity, and they believed that texts like the Emerald Tablet preserved insights that had been lost to the medieval period. They saw themselves as restoring a golden age of knowledge that combined philosophical sophistication with practical power. Marsilio Ficino, the great Florentine philosopher who translated the Corpus Hermeticum into Latin, treated the Emerald Tablet as one of the most important philosophical documents ever written. He believed that its principles could serve as a foundation for a new kind of natural philosophy, one that combined rigorous intellectual analysis with direct spiritual insight. This wasn't just academic theorizing. Renaissance thinkers believed that understanding the principles encoded in the Emerald Tablet could grant them practical power over natural forces. They saw the text as instructions for what they called natural magic, the art of working with natural laws rather than against them to achieve extraordinary results. Is this a recipe for turning lead into gold, or mind into clarity? For Renaissance alchemists, it was both. They understood that the external work of transmuting metals was inseparably connected to the internal work of transforming consciousness. The laboratory and the oratory were two aspects of a single practice. Paracelsus, the controversial physician and alchemist of the early 16th century, exemplified this integrated approach. He saw the principles of the Emerald Tablet as the foundation for a new kind of medicine, one that treated not just physical symptoms, but the underlying energetic patterns that connected human beings to the cosmos. His motto, "As above, so below," became a rallying cry for practitioners who sought to heal the whole person rather than just isolated diseases. The influence extended beyond individual practitioners to shape entire institutions and movements. The Rosicrucian manifestos of the early 17th century, which announced the existence of a secret brotherhood dedicated to reforming human knowledge, were saturated with Hermetic principles derived from texts like the Emerald Tablet. These documents spoke of a coming age when the barriers between science and spirituality would dissolve, allowing humanity to achieve unprecedented understanding and power. Even more mainstream scientific figures were influenced by Hermetic principles. Johannes Kepler, the astronomer who discovered the laws of planetary motion, was deeply influenced by the idea of correspondence between celestial and terrestrial phenomena. His search for the music of the spheres, mathematical harmonies governing planetary orbits, reflected the Hermetic belief that the same principles operated throughout all levels of creation. How could such a short text have survived for centuries across cultures? Part of the answer lies in its remarkable adaptability to different intellectual contexts. As new scientific discoveries challenged old ways of thinking, interpreters found ways to read the Emerald Tablet that incorporated these new insights while maintaining its essential mystique. Isaac Newton provides perhaps the most striking example of this adaptive interpretation. The great physicist who formulated the laws of motion and universal gravitation spent considerable time studying alchemical texts, including multiple versions of the Emerald Tablet. He made his own translation of the text, trying to extract from its symbolic language principles that could be expressed in mathematical terms. Newton's approach was characteristic of the early modern period, when the boundaries between what we now call science and magic were still quite permeable. He believed that the ancient wisdom preserved in Hermetic texts might contain genuine insights into the nature of physical reality, insights that could complement and enhance the new experimental philosophy. This scientific engagement with the Emerald Tablet continued into the 18th and 19th centuries, even as the mainstream scientific community became increasingly skeptical of alchemical and Hermetic traditions. Figures like Emanuel Swedenborg, the Swedish mystic and scientist, found in the text's principle of correspondence, a key to understanding the relationship between the physical and spiritual worlds. The 19th century saw a remarkable revival of interest in Hermetic wisdom, fueled partly by new archaeological discoveries in Egypt, and partly by a growing dissatisfaction with purely materialistic explanations of reality. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded in the 1880s, placed the Emerald Tablet at the center of their curriculum, treating it as a foundational text for understanding the principles of ceremonial magic. Why are quantum physicists, YouTubers, and psychologists still quoting the tablet today? The answer lies partly in the text's uncanny ability to anticipate insights that would later be formalized in modern science and psychology. The principle of correspondence, as above, so below, finds remarkable parallels in contemporary scientific understanding. We now know that the same physical laws govern phenomena from the quantum level to the cosmic scale. The mathematical equations that describe the behavior of subatomic particles are structurally similar to those that govern the motion of galaxies. Similarly, the tablet's emphasis on underlying unity resonates with discoveries in fields ranging from ecology to information theory. The insight that apparently separate phenomena are actually interconnected aspects of larger systems has become fundamental to modern scientific thinking. But the influence of the Emerald Tablet extends far beyond its anticipation of scientific insights. Its psychological and spiritual dimensions have proven equally enduring. Carl Jung's interpretation of alchemical symbolism as representing unconscious psychological processes opened up entirely new ways of understanding the text's relevance to human development and healing. Contemporary practitioners of various esoteric traditions continue to find in the Emerald Tablet a source of inspiration and guidance. Whether they're working with energy healing, meditation practices, or magical rituals, many find that the text's principles provide a coherent framework for understanding their experiences and organizing their practices. The digital age has brought new dimensions to the tablet's influence. Online communities dedicated to studying Hermetic wisdom share translations, interpretations, and practical applications of the text's principles. YouTube channels explore its connections to everything from quantum mechanics to consciousness research to ancient alien theories. This proliferation of interpretations raises important questions about authenticity and authority. What do skeptics say? And are they missing the point? Critics argue that the endless multiplication of meanings attached to the Emerald Tablet demonstrates its fundamental emptiness, that people are simply reading their own ideas into an ancient text that has no inherent meaning. But this criticism might miss something crucial about how wisdom traditions actually work. The value of a text like the Emerald Tablet might lie not in any single definitive interpretation, but in its capacity to serve as a catalyst for insight and transformation. Like a Rorschach test for seekers, it reveals as much about the interpreter as about the text itself. And this might be precisely the point. The enduring influence of the Emerald Tablet suggests that it taps into something fundamental about human nature and our relationship to reality. Whether interpreted scientifically, psychologically, or spiritually, the text consistently points toward themes that seem to be hardwired into human consciousness. The search for unity underlying diversity, the desire to understand our place in the larger scheme of things, and the hope that knowledge can be transformed into wisdom and power. As we move into our final section, we'll explore how these ancient themes continue to evolve in contemporary contexts, and why the Emerald Tablet remains relevant for seekers in the 21st century. We've traced the Emerald Tablet from its mysterious origins through its transformative impact on Western thought, but perhaps the most fascinating aspect of its story is how this ancient text continues to speak to contemporary seekers across wildly different fields and contexts. Why are quantum physicists, YouTubers, and psychologists still quoting the tablet today? The answer reveals something profound about the nature of wisdom itself and the human quest for understanding that transcends any particular era or culture. Let's start with the scientific dimension. While mainstream academic science has largely moved away from the kind of unified worldview that characterized Renaissance natural philosophy, many contemporary thinkers are finding unexpected resonances between ancient Hermetic principles and cutting-edge scientific insights. Quantum mechanics, for instance, has revealed a universe far stranger than anything envisioned by classical physics. At the quantum level, particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed. Information seems to travel instantaneously across vast distances, and the boundary between observer and observed becomes fundamentally ambiguous. These discoveries have led some physicists to explore connections between quantum phenomena and consciousness, echoing the Hermetic insight that mind and matter are intimately interconnected. The principle of correspondence, as above, so below, finds remarkable validation in fractal mathematics, where identical patterns repeat at every scale of magnification. From the branching patterns of blood vessels to the distribution of galaxies in the universe, we see the same organizational principles operating across dramatically different scales of existence. Systems theory and complexity science have revealed how simple rules can generate incredibly complex behaviors, and how emergent properties arise from the interactions of simpler components. This scientific understanding of emergence resonates strongly with the Emerald Tablet's teaching about the one thing from which all diversity arises. But it's not just theoretical physicists who are finding relevance in the ancient text. Practitioners working in fields like biomimicry, the discipline of learning from nature to solve human problems, often find themselves echoing Hermetic principles as they seek to understand the deeper patterns that govern natural systems. If you rewrote the tablet today, what truths would remain the same? This question invites us to consider what aspects of the text speak to universal, rather than culturally specific insights. The psychological dimension of the tablet's contemporary relevance is equally significant. Modern psychotherapists working with depth, psychological approaches often find the Emerald Tablet's imagery useful for understanding processes of personal transformation. The text's emphasis on separating the subtle from the gross resonates with therapeutic work that helps clients distinguish between healthy and unhealthy patterns of thought and behavior. The cyclical movement described in the tablet, ascending to heaven and descending to earth, maps remarkably well onto the therapeutic process, where insights gained in moments of heightened awareness must be integrated into daily life. to create lasting change. The integration of opposing forces that runs throughout alchemical symbolism provides a powerful metaphor for bringing unconscious material into conscious awareness. Modern trauma therapy has found particular value in these principles. The idea that healing involves bringing together what has been separated speaks directly to the fragmentation that trauma creates in the psyche. Somatic approaches to therapy, which work with the body as well as the mind, often operate from premises that would have been familiar to Renaissance alchemists. The understanding that physical and psychological processes are intimately interconnected, and that healing must address both dimensions simultaneously. The growing field of transpersonal psychology has also drawn on these ancient insights. Researchers studying consciousness, mystical experiences, and spiritual development often find the Emerald Tablet's framework useful for understanding states of awareness that transcend ordinary waking consciousness. The text's teaching about the unity underlying apparent diversity provides a conceptual bridge between scientific materialism and spiritual insight. Is there a missing part of the tablet that we've never found? This question takes on new dimensions in our digital age, where information can be preserved and transmitted in ways that would have been unimaginable to previous generations. Some contemporary interpreters suggest that the missing parts of the tablet might not be textual at all, but experiential. Insights that can only be gained through direct practice and personal transformation. The rise of consciousness research has added a new dimension to contemporary interpretations of the Emerald Tablet. Scholars exploring the therapeutic effects of altered states, whether through deep meditation, breathwork, or carefully studied substances, often describe experiences that echo Hermetic principles: the dissolution of boundaries between self and world, the perception of hidden unity, and the direct encounter with what mystics have long called the one thing, from which all multiplicity arises. These researchers find themselves in a position remarkably similar to that of Renaissance alchemists, trying to understand and integrate profound experiences that challenge conventional assumptions about the nature of reality. The Emerald Tablet's symbolic language provides a framework for articulating insights that are difficult to express in purely scientific terminology. The digital revolution has also created new contexts for the tablet's influence. Online communities dedicated to studying ancient wisdom traditions share translations, interpretations, and practical applications of Hermetic principles. Social media platforms host discussions that would have taken place in secret societies just a few generations ago. YouTube channels explore connections between the Emerald Tablet and everything from cryptocurrency to consciousness research to conspiracy theories. This democratization of esoteric knowledge has both positive and negative aspects. While it makes ancient wisdom more accessible than ever before, it also opens the door to misinterpretation and commercialization. What do skeptics say? And are they missing the point? Contemporary critics of the Emerald Tablet's continued relevance often focus on what they see as the text's fundamental vagueness. They argue that its symbolic language is so ambiguous that people can read virtually any meaning into it they choose. From this perspective, the tablet's apparent profundity is really just a reflection of human pattern-seeking behavior gone awry. These critics have a point. The history of Emerald Tablet interpretation is certainly filled with wishful thinking, confirmation bias, and outright fantasy. The text has been used to justify everything from medieval gold-making schemes to modern get-rich-quick programs promising to teach the Hermetic secrets of manifestation. But this criticism might miss something important about how symbolic language actually functions. The ambiguity that skeptics see as a weakness might actually be one of the text's greatest strengths. By operating at a level of abstraction that transcends specific cultural and historical contexts, the Emerald Tablet can serve as a bridge between different ways of knowing and different domains of experience. Consider how the text functions for contemporary practitioners of various healing arts. A massage therapist working with energy healing might find in the tablet's principles a framework for understanding how physical manipulation can affect psychological states. An artist exploring the relationship between creativity and spirituality might discover in its imagery a language for describing experiences that elude purely rational analysis. The rise of integrative medicine provides another example of how ancient Hermetic principles continue to find contemporary applications. Practitioners who seek to treat the whole person rather than just isolated symptoms often find themselves operating from premises that would have been familiar to Renaissance physicians influenced by the Emerald Tablet. The understanding that physical, emotional, and spiritual dimensions of health are intimately interconnected. Environmental movements have also drawn on Hermetic insights, particularly the principle of correspondence. The understanding that human beings are not separate from nature, but intimately connected to larger ecological systems, reflects the same fundamental insight encoded in the phrase "as above, so below." Climate activists often speak in language that echoes Hermetic teachings about the interconnectedness of all existence. The field of consciousness studies represents perhaps the most significant contemporary context for Emerald Tablet interpretation. Researchers investigating the nature of consciousness itself, how subjective experience arises from objective brain processes, how individual minds might be connected at deeper levels, how awareness might extend beyond the boundaries of the individual self, often find themselves grappling with questions that would have been familiar to ancient Hermetic philosophers. Carl Jung's pioneering insight that alchemical symbolism represents unconscious psychological processes has found new applications in this context. From his perspective, the one thing mentioned in the Emerald Tablet represents the self, the archetypal center of the psyche that transcends and unifies all partial aspects of personality. The various operations described in the text, separation, purification, conjunction, correspond to different phases of psychological development, and the integration of unconscious material with conscious awareness. The hard problem of consciousness, explaining how subjective experience emerges from objective physical processes, bears a striking resemblance to the alchemical puzzle of how spirit emerges from matter. The Emerald Tablet's teaching about the unity of above and below, spirit and matter, provides a conceptual framework that some contemporary researchers find more useful than purely materialistic approaches. Virtual reality and artificial intelligence have created new contexts for exploring Hermetic principles. As we create digital worlds that can profoundly affect human consciousness, Questions about the relationship between mind and matter, reality and simulation, become increasingly urgent. Similarly, as we develop artificial minds that might eventually achieve some form of awareness, the Emerald Tablet's teaching that the force or power is entire if it be converted into earth takes on new meaning in an age when digital information can be instantiated in physical hardware, and when virtual experiences can have real psychological and physiological effects. How could such a short text have survived for centuries across cultures? Part of the answer lies in its remarkable ability to evolve and adapt while maintaining its essential character. Like a genetic code that remains stable while allowing for infinite variation in expression, the Emerald Tablet seems to contain patterns that can manifest in countless different contexts while retaining their fundamental structure. This adaptability has allowed the text to serve as a kind of strange attractor for human consciousness, a pattern that draws diverse experiences and insights into relationship with each other. Whether someone approaches it from a scientific, psychological, spiritual, or artistic perspective, they tend to find connections and resonances that enrich their understanding. The contemporary relevance of the Emerald Tablet might ultimately lie not in any specific claims it makes about reality, but in its function as a catalyst for holistic thinking. In an age of increasing specialization and fragmentation, the text's insistence on underlying unity offers a counterbalance to purely reductionist approaches. As we face global challenges that cannot be solved by any single discipline or perspective, climate change, technological disruption, social inequality, the mental health crisis, we need frameworks that can help us think across traditional boundaries. The Emerald Tablet's ancient wisdom about the interconnectedness of all existence might be exactly what we need to navigate the complexity of our contemporary world. This brings us to our final reflection on why the Emerald Tablet continues to captivate and inspire. In a world that often feels fragmented and chaotic, the text offers a vision of underlying order and meaning. It suggests that behind the apparent randomness of existence lies a deeper pattern, one that we can learn to perceive and work with rather than against. Whether this vision corresponds to objective reality or simply reflects deep-seated human needs and aspirations might be less important than the practical effects it has on those who embrace it. People who operate from Hermetic principles often report greater sense of purpose, enhanced creativity, and improved ability to navigate life's challenges. The Emerald Tablet reminds us that wisdom traditions survive not because they provide final answers, but because they ask enduring questions and provide frameworks for ongoing exploration. Its 13 sentences continue to generate new insights and applications because they point toward aspects of existence that remain mysterious and profound, regardless of how much our surface knowledge advances. In our final moments together, let's return to the question that opened our exploration. What if a handful of cryptic lines written thousands of years ago held the blueprint for how reality works, and no one can prove who wrote it? Perhaps the deepest teaching of the Emerald Tablet is that some of the most important truths cannot be proven in any conventional sense. They can only be experienced and lived. The text invites us to become participants in the very mysteries it describes, to discover through our own exploration what it means for above and below to be united, for the one to become many while remaining one. If you rewrote the tablet today, what truths would remain the same? This question points towards something eternal in human experience. The recognition that we are part of something larger than ourselves, that the patterns we see in our individual lives reflect deeper cosmic principles, and that understanding these principles can transform not just our knowledge, but our very being. The Emerald Tablet endures because it speaks to this eternal dimension of human experience while remaining open to fresh interpretation and application. It bridges the gap between ancient wisdom and contemporary insight, between mystical intuition and scientific discovery, between individual transformation and collective evolution. As we continue to face the mysteries and challenges of existence, this ancient text remains a valuable companion, not because it provides easy answers, but because it reminds us that the deepest questions are worth pursuing, and that the search for wisdom is itself a transformative practice. The 13 sentences of the Emerald Tablet may never yield their final secrets, but they continue to serve their most important function, inspiring human beings to look deeper, think more holistically, and remain open to the miraculous in the midst of the ordinary. In the end, perhaps that inspiration is the true gold that this ancient alchemical text was always meant to help us discover. The Emerald Tablet stands as a testament to the enduring power of symbolic language to transcend the limitations of any single era or culture. Its journey from mysterious Arabic manuscript to foundational text of Western esotericism to contemporary source of inspiration demonstrates something profound about how wisdom actually works. Not as a fixed set of doctrines, but as a living process of discovery and transformation. Whether you approach the Emerald Tablet as a historical curiosity, a philosophical text, a practical guide, or a mystical teaching, it offers something that our contemporary world desperately needs. A reminder that reality is far more mysterious and interconnected than our everyday consciousness usually recognizes. In 13 simple sentences, it encodes a vision of existence that remains as radical today as it was 1,000 years ago. The next time you encounter these ancient words, that which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below. Remember that you're not just reading a historical artifact, you're engaging with a living tradition of inquiry that has inspired some of humanity's greatest thinkers and continues to offer fresh insights to anyone willing to look beneath the surface of things. The mysteries of the Emerald Tablet remain unsolved, and perhaps they always will. But in the very act of engaging with these mysteries, we participate in the ancient human quest for wisdom and understanding that the text itself embodies. And in that participation, we discover that the true treasure was never the answers we might find, but the transformation that occurs in us through the searching itself.